Hello, my name is Ross Carter, and I am coming to you today from the conference room at the Fredericktown United Methodist Church, where I am the worship director, and we have just recently celebrated our 204th year as a church. The article I chose to review is Frank Lambert's Peddler and Divinity on George Whitefield, and this is George Whitefield here. This is a portrait of him later in life, from his pulpit where he is most famous, obviously, as a Great Awakening preacher. And in this article, Mr. Lambert explores the success and popularity of Whitefield during the Great Awakening period in colonial America. So in this article, he kind of compares Whitefield to modern evangelist Billy Graham in so much as that Whitefield employed consumerism in his approach to evangelism, much like Graham did during his crusades. They were well published. Everybody knew when Billy Graham was going to be in your area, and everybody knew when George Whitefield was going to be in their area as well. Now, this was a new approach during Whitefield's time. The development of substantial newspaper networks and publishing houses both in England and in the colonies really allowed for widespread coverage and advertisement of upcoming attractions and the coverage of events that have already happened in different regions and different colonies, even across the Atlantic. Whitefield initially came to America at the behest of John Wesley in an attempt to fund an orphanage in rural Georgia. And this really is Whitefield doing what he feels he was called to do. He was portrayed as undertaking a cause without selfish interest. He was part of a group of preachers that were trying to establish a foothold in England at the time. And in reality, this gave him an opportunity to kind of separate himself from them. So prior to coming to Georgia, Whitefield had preached a number of fundraising sermons in England, and news spread quickly through the publication process to the colonies of his popularity, his energy, his zeal in the pulpit, and his cause. So this press and popularity would really be the factor that did in fact separate Whitefield from that other group of his contemporaries at the time. Once in America, he preached sermon after sermon after sermon, traveling about, raising hundreds of pounds for this orphanage and other causes that came up. And Benjamin Franklin kind of took an interest in some of the things that were going on in his life. Franklin was a printer at the time, a publisher. He had a pretty significant network of newspapers and often dedicated space for Whitefield to publish about his ministries, about accomplishments, about announcements of upcoming events. And eventually, upwards of 60% of all of the Pennsylvania Gazettes published had articles about or written by Whitefield during this period. An example of what the Pennsylvania Gazette of the day looked like. This one does, in fact, include an article on a sermon Whitefield had just recently preached and kind of the feedback the community was giving, the impact it had on their community, and such. In her diary, Mrs. Ann Maginot, one of the wealthiest women in Charleston, compared Whitefield's sermons to the most entertaining theater productions of the time, which she frequently attended in Charleston. She was enthralled with his energy and his delivery of God's word. However, Whitefield's success at the time was not without controversy. Historian Brett McAnally contends that Whitefield, on occasion, would intentionally stir up controversy just to increase interest in his movement. If people had something controversial to discuss, they wanted to go even more to find out what it was about and who this man was that was talking. One of the most controversial things that he did, he published an unfavorable critique of Harvard University, which drew a lot of attention and some ire. Others contended that such enthusiasm in the pulpit was not suitable for a good Anglican preacher. It went against many of the concepts of the time. We still struggle with this issue today. In many megachurches, where do we draw the line between business and ministry? Where do we see the difference between production, performance, and worship? And it is a struggle that we still deal with to this very day in American churches, particularly. So I think that Lambert's analysis was accurate in so much that he looked at primary resources at the time, reflections of historians after the fact, and how Whitefield was much different than many of his contemporaries in the fact that he did utilize new methods to spread God's word, even if those methods were sometimes controversial. Thank you.